Hi everyone, today we're going to take a look at an extension cord from Royu. Now Royu is part of the Firefly set of companies, and these were given to me by Firefly for Christmas as presents. Now I know what you're thinking, it's an extension cord, what on earth can you say about an extension cord? Well, stick around and you might find something useful in this video. Now I've got two of them here, but I'm just going to look at this one because they're essentially identical, except that this one here has double sockets and this one here has single sockets, so we'll just look at the bigger version. So inside the pack you get the extension cord itself, and because it has a grounded plug while many people only have a 2-pin plug, they also include this nice little adapter. Now the great thing about this is that if your socket doesn't have ground but you want a grounded extension cord, you can always add it here. So you can plug this into your standard outlet and then run your own ground, so that's very useful. You also get two little mounting screws in case you want to mount this onto the wall, which is pretty much classic with any extension cord, although they don't usually give you the screws, so that's a nice touch. And you also get a micro USB charge cable. So let's take a very quick look at the specs. You can see it's rated for 250 volts, 10 amps, so 2500 watts maximum, 18 gauge wire. It's got a thermal circuit breaker, and it says number of outlets 2, but we'll come back to that in a second. And then 3 USB charging ports, because yes, not only do you have the universal sockets plus the standard 2-pin sockets, but you also have 3 USB ports. Now on a lot of these extension cords that have USB sockets, they're normally substandard, like they can't output much power, but this one is actually very powerful. It's up to 3 amp, and you can actually draw 3 amp out of a single socket, or you could have 1 amp, 1 amp, 1 amp, or you could have 2 amp and 1 amp. Now this may not mean anything to you, but an average smartphone nowadays draws 1 amp, so that means you could charge 3 smartphones at their top speed. Now a tablet consumes around 2 amps. You could have 1 tablet and 1 cell phone, and they would both be charging at their full speed. Now you could also just plug in 3 tablets, but then you'd only have 1 amp going to each one, so it'd be a little bit slower, but it would still work. So a 3 amp maximum is actually pretty impressive. I have an extension like this from another brand, but the USB ports output a maximum of 0.5 amp, so half an amp on each one, and it only had 2 ports. So this is really a big improvement over the older style and over a lot of other brands out there that are really like skimping on this. Now the stats here says number of outlets, 2 outlets. But you've actually got 2 universals and 2 pins. So for me, that's 4 outlets. So yeah, I guess they're just referring to these universal type, but you can actually plug in 4 different devices, as long as you can make the plugs fit, of course. And as mentioned earlier, it does have a thermal circuit breaker, so breaker automatically shuts off when 10 amp maximum load is exceeded, and it's got a reset feature, so we'll be testing that out later. And it also has surge protection. So let's open this up and actually have a look inside. Now the screws that are used in this are a security type screw, so you do need a special driver to be able to remove them. Anyway, let's go ahead and open this up. And here you go, you can see inside it's got a neat layout. And something else I should mention is that this is a double insulated cord. What does that mean? Well, you've got the outer insulation, and then each wire inside has its own insulation as well. So unlike, say, this cable here, this extension, if I was to cut this by accident, the live AC wire would be exposed. But with this one, if I was to put a little cut in here, it would only break the outer insulation. We still had the insulation on the internal wires, so it's just a little bit safer. Now when I first opened this up, I was expecting to see the surge protection somewhere around the AC input side. Now of course I spotted this MOV or this varistor straight away, which is for surge protection, but since it was on the USB board, I assumed it was just for the USB. So I emailed Firefly, and they actually got me a reply from one of their engineers really quickly. I was quite surprised. They even like did an overlay image of the board and explained it, so I was quite impressed. And I mean, it makes sense. Basically what they're saying is that the varistor here is in parallel with the AC, which is true, it is, because this USB board is connected directly to the AC input. So this is your surge protection, and I guess it makes sense for them to put it on this PCB, because they can have this all designed as one unit, and then they can slot that in, so it's one less manufacturing process for them to go through. If they had it over here, then someone would have to solder it in, or there would basically be an extra manufacturing step. So having it put on the USB board itself, I guess it makes sense. Now personally I would like to see like more than one MOV, but it's good enough, I guess, and that is your surge protection right there. And of course this is your thermal circuit breaker, up to 10 amp resettable. We're going to try that out later. I haven't pushed it to its limit, so I'm curious to see if it really works. I assume it will because it's just an off-the-shelf component, a common component, but we're going to test it out anyway. Now when we've looked at some other extension cords in the past, especially the super cheap ones from, you know, various different brands, what we found inside is that the metal used for the contacts was super thin, but they've done a good job here. They've used a good thickness metal, even on the ground here, you know, that's a good quality thick metal, but everything is soldered. Personally, I prefer to see crimped connections because I feel like they hold up better to wear and tear, especially if it's an extension cord that you're going to be like dragging around, dropping it, etc. But I assume they've, you know, done their testing and found that soldering is good enough. Now you might be thinking, well, what happens if there's an overload? Everything gets really hot and then the solder melts. Well, my assumption would be that the breaker would kick in, you know, long before that actually happens, so I guess it's not really a concern. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the electronics here because this is all related to the USB ports. Now, I will put some more information on my blog post, which you can find in the video description, but we won't go into too much detail here. You've already seen the surge protection, which is for the AC, but also for this board. And then we've also got a fuse behind this. And this little board here is holding the voltage regulator, and that's the main brains of this basically, that's, you know, regulating the 5-volt output for these USB ports. So I think that's pretty much everything to see on the inside. Let's put this back together and then test out these USB ports. So now we're going to use my USB wattmeter and a dummy load to test out these USB ports. Now something to know is that they're only active if the extension's turned on using this switch here. So it does have to be turned on if you want to use these USB ports. Now on camera it looks like this red LED is flashing, but it's actually solid red. So it's just to do with the refresh rate of my camera. So I've got my dummy load connected. Let's do some testing. So you can see 5 volts, 1 amp, no problem. Let's keep going. 5 volts, 2 amp, which is 10 watts, no problem, let's keep going. 3 amp, 15 watts, let's keep going. And this is actually maxing out my tester here, or my dummy load. 5 volts, 3.2 amp, and the little fan on my dummy load has come on. But look at that, incredible, 5 volts, 3.2 amp, 16 watts, very impressive. And now I want to show you it charging an iPad, because what a lot of people don't know is that to charge an Apple iPad at its top speed, you need a little bit of magic inside your USB charger, and this one has it. So let's go ahead and plug it in. And then if we look at the wattmeter here, you can see it's charging at 5 volts, 2.1 amp, 10.6 watts. So that's very impressive. That's charging my iPad just as fast as the original genuine Apple charger, and that's something you won't find in every USB charger, especially not one built into an extension cord. They really haven't cut any corners. They've done a really good job on this. And I've tested various different loads. I've had 2 amp and 1 amp, I've had 111, I've had various different combinations, and it really does perform. I'm very impressed with it. You can feel a little bit of heat from it, but nothing that concerned me. So they've really, you know, I'm very impressed, because this is where a lot of people would cut corners. Like they would put USB ports on there, but they're not that great. But here, they've done a good job, I have to admit. They've done a very good job. Anyway, let's now go to the other room and test this breaker and see if we can get it to trip. I haven't tested it yet, so let's hope everything goes to plan. So how are we going to test this? Well, I have a water heater that draws around 15 amp or around 3,500 watts. So that's well over the 10 amp rating on this. So we'll plug it in here and then see if it trips this resettable breaker. So now the water heater is plugged in, let's go turn it on and see what happens. So that should now be drawing around 15 amp or 3,500 watts. Let me see if the cable feels warm. No, it feels okay. Let's see if the breaker trips. It might take a little while before it does. Oh, there you go, it made me jump, but it just popped out now. So that is tripped. It took around maybe a minute or a minute and a half. The cable did get a little bit warm, I can feel it through the insulation, but it worked as expected. There was an overload and it's tripped. Let me go and turn off the water. So for me, that's a successful test. We overloaded it with 15 amp, it took around a minute, minute and a half, and then the breaker is tripped. The wire did get a little bit warm, which is to be expected because this is only rated for 10 amp and I put 15 amp on it. But now the real test is whether we can reset it and get it working again. So let me unplug the water heater and then we'll push in the breaker. And there you go, red light is on. Don't know if you can see that on camera, but red light is on and it's working again. So that's a thumbs up. Another nice thing about this is that it's got safety shutters. So if you've got little kids that try to poke their fingers in there, you don't really need to worry so much. Now you might say, well, what about those ones? Well, that's just ground, so it doesn't really matter if they touch that. But it's these ones here that you need to protect. And even if they poke something in there, it has pretty good protection. Now I'm not going to say it's perfect, because if you have something that's like pokey, like it's got a pokey end on the end like that, you can kind of like force it down and get it in there. So it is possible to get something in there if you really try, but for your average toddler or young child, they're probably not going to work out how to do it. So I think that pretty much sums up this extension cord. I think a lot of people don't put much thought into buying an extension. They just think, oh, I need another 4 sockets, so I get that one, or oh, I could also do with charging my cell phone, so I'll get that one. But there are things you want to look out for. Does it have safety features like the shutters? Does it have a double insulated cord? Does it have a resettable circuit breaker? Does it have built-in surge protection? Can the USB ports actually provide enough power to be useful? Does it have extra features like this with it's got a little pull-out thing so you can put your cell phone there while it's charging? And this one reminds me of Apple. You pull out these things here and you can wrap your cord around it to make it neat. So just little things like that that you might want to look out for when you're buying your next extension cord. So if you enjoyed this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching.